Lauren, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the Hardwood Knocks podcast. Your first time appearing, so I'm
Mhm.
I'm grateful that you didn't say no, didn't poke around and see how bad the content is. We're like, you know what? I'm gonna make the smart decision and pass. Uh, how the most important question I'll ask on this podcast: how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's been quite a week in the NBA. I'm sure everybody has been like, when will this season start so we can get past all of this off-season drama? But other than that, I mean everything's good on my end. How are you doing?
I am spectacular, but 100% with you on this offseason being like all sorts of weird. I did not
Mhm.
have to start, a new job like you did with the AGC covering a new team amid all of it, but just I thought it was the first real offseason we had in a couple of years. I was like, oh, maybe teams and players are going to want to take it easy, like they haven't had this break in a while. And it was just
Mhm.
there was a small dead period, but like even as we're recording this today, like there's just this Bojan Bogdanovic trade to the Detroit Pistons,
Mhm.
which is just like just so random and bizarre. And there's all the other storylines that have still yet to be,
To
resolved.
unfold. Yeah.
Looking at like the Lakers, I don't want to talk about
Mhm.
anything with the Lakers. So I'm just waiting for Russell Westbrook to get
Oh
sent
my
somewhere.
gosh.
But I'm totally with you that this offseason was a little bit busier, even in
Mhm.
terms of just speculation and of course the Nets imploding as per usual than I actually expected.
Yeah, I think I was personally surprised that Kevin Durant and Kyrie decided that they were going to go back and try and run things back, especially all of the noise that they made about wanting trades and everything to happen. But I mean, I'm kind of happy that they did. I'm kind of happy that they didn't make any more splashes because we've seen a lot of splashes this offseason as it is. I don't know how many more I could take. But I think the fact that this Eastern Conference is going to be so competitive. It's so compelling. I'm so excited to see how this unfolds. And of course, we're here to talk about the Hawks and where they might fit into all of that. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really fun season, really interesting. And I mean, we haven't even gotten to the idea of what might happen when the trade deadline comes in February. I mean, I don't even know. It's the NBA.
Yeah, I know some people think transactions are cringy, but the offseason kind of reminds you how just like germane they are to the
Yeah,
NBA operating. I will say
exactly.
selfishly, I wish the Nets blew it up because this bleeds into this podcast. It would have made the
Yeah.
East just like a little bit easier to figure out. And like the Hawks are just one of those teams that I've been agonizing over.
Yes.
And they wasted no time.
None.
When you started this gig, you said in June, they
Mm-hmm.
acquired Dejounte Murray. And
Mm-hmm.
so now that we're more than 2 months away from that. I was just curious to know, like, what were your general thoughts on how much they ended up giving up for him, especially with the Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trades in the rear view?
Yeah, I at first was absolutely flabbergasted that they were willing to part with two unprotected first round picks. And then obviously they do have a protected first round pick that they gave up. I wasn't surprised that they were going to part with Danilo Gallinari just because he was on an expiring contract. And, they're trying to move numbers around to make things work, especially since they have so much money on the books that they still owe to John Collins, Trae Young, Clint Capella. I mean, Bogdanovich. I mean, there's just so much money that they have spent so far. So it wasn't surprising to me that they decided that they wanted to move on from Gallinari, especially because he's on the older end of things. And so this is a team that's young and they're looking to really make that push for the playoffs. So I was a little flabbergasted by the picks part. But then when we saw the Rudy Gobert trade and how much he commanded, when we saw the Donovan Mitchell trade, he commanded. I mean, I thought at first, I mean, maybe it's not as comparable, but when you think about what Dejounte Murray is going to give this team, he gives them another superstar. He gives them another guy who is an all-star. He adds a lot of defensive presence on the court with Trae Young. And the fact that he's going to be a leader on this team, of course, it makes sense that they're willing to kind of, I like to say, mortgage their future a little bit to
Right.
take a chance on this guy. But I think he's just going to add so much. I mean, I already mentioned defense. He's going to be one of those guys that they look to help lead the young guys and bring them along defensively, especially as they're trying to shift their defensive identity.
Yeah, I'm with you on the opportunity cost too, because it's just like they didn't give up any long-term player equity in this. And so you have
Mm-hmm.
to replace that with something, and that would be
Mm-hmm.
draft assets. And then I go back and I think Mitchell and Gobert are both significantly better than Murray. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you look at what the Cavs gave up for Mitchell specifically. I'm fine with what the Hawks did. And I will say Atlanta's a very good, like, it's more of a glamour market to me than people give it credit, but I want to
I
see
agree.
teams that are not a flagship, Los Angeles, Chicago,
Mhm.
New York. I want to see those teams make these moves. And so I was
Mhm.
in full support of it. I also am enthralled by the defense that Dejounte Murray brings to a team that was pretty atrocious on this end, except for some,
5th
like,
worst in
yeah,
the league.
right. And there were
I
some
mean,
stretches where it was like, you go back and look, oh, they were like 7th for 12 games or something. It was like, no, that
mhm.
was all noise. It had to be luck. They were just bad. And so
Yeah.
what do you actually what do you think this team is most excited about that he brings defensively, or how do you see Murray impacting their defense the most?
I honestly think, I mean, I don't think you can really underestimate how much somebody's attitude toward defense can really change the way a team looks at it. I mean, this is a guy that they like to say is a dog on the court. I mean, he averaged what, 2 steals per game. Yes, sometimes you see him reaching a little bit, but the fact that he's somebody who's going to go after it, I think will rub off on the rest of the team. And that's something that they need. I mean, they already mandated that the rest of the guys on this roster get better defensively. They've tasked Onyeka Okongwu with being a better guy on the defensive boards. I mean, you have a guy like Clint Capela who's kind of there, but you need the rest of the team to get better. And if you have a guy who is willing to go out there, dive on the floor, deflect balls, I mean, I think he was second in the league or third in the league in deflections. So I think the fact that you have somebody who can impact the game this much on that end of the ball, it's going to rub off on the rest of the guys. I think it's going to take pressure off of Trae Young to try and be defensive. And I think it's just going to kind of bolster the rest of this team with DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, and as I mentioned, Clint Capella.
I almost think, and I would echo everything that you said. I
Mm-hmm.
almost think that one of the biggest benefits to having him is that it doesn't saddle DeAndre Hunter with being someone I really don't think that he is. And there was like a point before he got injured in year 2 where I was like, oh, maybe he's that guy on defense and even has more on offense. I'm just not
Mm-hmm.
there anymore. And so I think that having that trickle down effect that you sort of mentioned, and if Clint Capella is healthy for the
Mm-hmm.
entire year, there are some really interesting lineups even with Trae Young that you can roll out and expect to be pretty good defensively. I've actually
Yeah.
been more concerned about the offensive fit between
Yes.
Trae and Murray.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious on two fronts where you stand with, should we expect Trae Young to be off the ball more and maybe flying around screens or even camping
Mm-hmm.
out behind the 3-point line? And do you think that's a role he is capable of filling? And then two
Mm-hmm.
would be, should we expect to see Nate McMillan just stagger these two guys a ton?
So to answer your second question first, I definitely think we're going to see them being staggered a bit more. I think they both add such different talents as primary ball handlers that the Hawks are definitely going to want to take advantage of that, especially because of Murray's ability to attack the rim so much. I mean, they don't have as many shooters as they did last year per se, but the fact that he can split defenses, he's not afraid to drive into contact, and all of those things that made him an all-star this past season. They're gonna want to tap into that more. Now, I think they're going to kind of want to do a little bit of a co-ball handling situation when they are on the floor together. And I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that, just because you also have DeAndre Hunter and John Collins who do have the capability to knock shots down from 3. And you can kind of lean on them a little bit more to do that. And then also they can really utilize Clint Capella's capabilities in the pick and roll a little bit more. I mean, both Trae Young and Dejounte, I believe, were in like the top 20 as pick and roll ball handlers. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of capability that they can rely on, and I think the fact that Trae and Dejounte both will command a lot of defenders to kind of fly toward them will take a lot of pressure off of the other guys in the starting 5.
I think I'm probably just most concerned with, like, if the idea is you have to take the ball out of Trae Young's hands some more to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
I probably don't love it just because I like the
Yeah.
idea of having Trae Young on the ball. But do you think he does get looped into sort of the James Harden and Luka Doncic conversations where it's, well, what can these guys actually do off the ball? Do you think there's
Mm-hmm.
more to him there just because of what we know about him as a shooter, or do you think it's maybe even tough to scale the shooting that he brings to kind of away from the ball? Where is this someone who can fly around screens, or who's going to be okay, camping out and capitalizing, let's say, off Dejounte Murray's drive and kicks, or pick and roll passes with Clint Capela?
I mean, I think I can see him capitalizing on that a little bit. I mean, he shot 38% from the floor overall from three. I mean, I have to go back and look at his catch and shoot numbers, but I mean, he's only what? He's only 24. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if we've seen all of the things that Trae Young can do just because of what the Hawks have kind of put in front of him to roll out every night with. I think that, Trae is a very, very smart player. I think that the way that he looks at the game, I think he's probably really excited to have somebody that he can play off the ball with. I don't know if he had that before, so I don't think we've even gotten a chance to see it yet, if I'm being honest.
I think that's why I can't picture it, because we
Yeah,
haven't seen it.
exactly.
And when you go back and look through his career in the league, like, he is never ranked lower than ninth in the percentage of his field goals made that go unassisted among high
Mhm,
volume. So, like, he's very much been just so central to the offense. And
mhm,
I can't picture it. I want to see it. I'm just curious whether it works, because he does have, as a shooter, but like, if you
mhm.
want him either setting screens or coming around screens, like, he is slight in frame. And so I'm wondering if
Yeah,
that hampers him at all, but I want to see it. I think I'm just less sure of it than clearly Atlanta is with the fit between those two.
for sure. And I mean, I think you can rely on the abilities of, as we mentioned, Clint Capella, but also I mean, John Collins is a pretty big guy that they can use to set those screens for Trae if they need to. And I mean, I'm sure maybe even DeAndre. I mean, they do have potential. I mean, I think they have enough height in the front court that they can try and utilize it to their advantage. But again, it's hard to see just because we haven't seen it yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if Trae has the capability to do it.
You did make me a little bit more confident. It was something you said about Murray's rim pressure, and
Yeah.
I committed to memory. I know that Trae Young led the league in assists at the rim last year, and so I looked it up really quickly.
Yeah.
Murray was 10th, and so now
Yeah.
you have like two of these top 10 guys at creating looks at the rim on a team that has Onyeka Okongwu,
Mhm.
Clint Capella, and John Collins on it. So you made me feel a little bit better about this offensive fit, or at least the dynamic on offense, even if they're staggering with these two
Yeah.
guards.
Agreed. And I mean, we also have to remember there's also Bogey as well. So he is somebody I feel like that they can shift up to the three if necessary and, add a little bit more size in terms of if they're going to go small ball. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll
Yeah,
see.
I'm gonna be disappointed, and I'll ask about this later, but if they don't roll out, like, any WTF lineups that catch me off guard this season, I'm gonna be a little bit disappointed when looking at this roster.
I feel like isn't that something that Nate likes to do is like what the heck lineups.
Yeah, I mean, he also does a lot of stuff where it's like, well, why did he even try? Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah,
he with the personnel at his disposal, if they're fully healthy, I could see him getting a little weird.
a little
I
creative.
listened to a podcast. You had Vince Ellis on your podcast,
Uh-huh.
and you guys touched upon this a little bit, but are you just surprised that John Collins is still on this team? He was painted as this just like goner entering
Yeah.
entering the offseason, yet he's still here. Like, he's still in Atlanta.
I think at first I was a little bit surprised. I'm not gonna lie. Just because of what he could have potentially brought them back. But the more I think about it, it's like it shouldn't be surprising, especially because they went out and got Murray. And then from what I saw when I watched that one game at the crossover pro am, I was pretty happy with what I saw with the early chemistry that those three guys were building. I mean, you had Trae passing to John, you had Dejounte passing to John, you had Trae passing to Dejounte to passing to John. I mean, it just showed that there's so much that these three guys can be as the Hawks' big three. And then when you factor in a guy like DeAndre, if they do decide to, offer him his rookie extension, um, I think the sky's the limit with this team, if I'm being honest. I'm not surprised that he's still here, to go
I
back to your original.
Right, when you really think about it, it was all the rumors tied to him were like, "Oh, Hawks get picks for John Collins." It's like, no, the Hawks aren't trying to get picks. They're trying to get better. And so why would you
Exactly.
be divesting this player into picks? I do wonder though, because he was pretty open about like wanting a more expansive offensive role.
Mhm.
Does now adding another ball dominant guard to the equation complicate his place in the offense at all? Like I think he's underrated because his offense is, and our
Mhm.
listeners make fun of me because I say it all the time with him, is so scalable. Just like
Mhm.
someone who went from being used as the primary screener to playing with Clint Capela and being able to, showed off a little bit of his floor game, but knock down threes off the catch. That's just, you can't just throw that away. Like, that's a really
Yeah.
good player. So I think he's underrated, but for someone who wants maybe a more prominent role within the offense, I am
Mhm.
curious as to whether the Hawks have complicated his place in the pecking order with the Murray move specifically.
I don't know. I don't think so, just because the fact that you have both Murray and Trae who can go out and get you 20 points a night if you needed them to, that's going to just take a lot of those opposing teams' best defenders off of John, which will, in my opinion, free him up to be John. I mean, I don't know. I think that especially if you're going to be staggering Trae and Murray's minutes, you can also stagger John so that he does have a little bit more responsibility
Mhm.
in the Hawks' offense if you need him to. They're going to put a premium on shooting, and I believe John is a very capable shooter. So, I mean, you don't. I think because they traded away Kevin Huerter, who was one of their high volume shooters last season, that does put a little bit more responsibility on John and DeAndre, just because Murray doesn't have that same strength as they do. And I mean, if the Hawks are going to continue to be one of the top shooting teams in the league, they're going to need John to be able to do that. Now, if he's trying to be the guy that attacks the basket a little bit more, then yes, I think that does complicate things a little bit. But if they're shifting his role to kind of be the guy that stretches the floor, then no, I don't think it complicates things.
And he's probably someone that when Trae's off the court and you have Murray on the floor, you almost just want to tie him to those minutes because him and Murray make so much sense together because Murray does have he has a little bit of a mid-range game in the rim
Mhm.
pressure, but he's very much TBD to put it kindly as a shooter
Yes.
overall. And I was also wondering if having someone like Murray and if Hunter's healthy and you can add more resistance at the
Mhm.
point of attack in the perimeter, if it makes more sense then when Capella's not on the floor, you do have Okongwu, but
Mhm.
maybe John Collins logs a little bit more time as the backup center during those minutes because you don't. I think he's come a long way defensively. I don't
Mhm.
think you want him as your primary backline defender. I also
No.
think that maybe doesn't matter as much if you're putting both Hunter and Murray in the lineup with him now.
I agree. And I mean, we also haven't even factored in where Kaminsky is going to fit into this. So, I mean, if you have Kaminsky as the five, John is, the guy who's the four, I mean, maybe that does also free up that opportunity for him to be the guy that attacks the rim.
The other polarizing player on this team, aside from John Collins, is DeAndre Hunter. Do you have
Yes.
any sense of how this team values him, or would you even hazard as to do you think he gets an extension? Does he not get an extension?
I think the fact that we're 1 month away from that deadline, it doesn't bode well in my opinion. I think that if they wanted to, they would give him the number, I guess, that he's looking for, but they haven't. I mean, I think the reason why is just because he hasn't been able to stay on the floor as consistently as they need him to. And if you're gonna be paying a guy big money, then you need him to stay on the floor. Um, but I do think they value what he brings to the table. And I don't know. I just haven't gotten a sense yet of whether or not they're going to give him what he's looking for. If I'm being honest, I've asked, but nobody's singing.
Yeah, and when you bill someone as a 3 and D wing, the dollar signs are there just seeing what,
Hmm.
there's the higher end of what Mikal Bridges got, even what OG Anunoby got. I
Yeah.
have definitely not seen enough from Hunter at either end at this point. If he can have a fully healthy season where he's, keeping his 3-point percentage, but taking
Hmm.
more than, 3.7 attempts per game, can he up that to 5 plus? Maybe you feel a little bit more confident investing in him. This feels like for the Hawks, it's better for them to wait and see just because of how topsy turvy his first 3 years have been.
I agree. And please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not certain that many players in his draft class have gotten their rookie extensions yet, like the Cam Johnsons and And
Like
the
the non-max guys are still just floating around, unless you're RJ Barrett. Like the non-max guys are just still floating around out there predominantly. So
exactly. And he, I guess where he is right now, he's still considered kind of a role player, so it doesn't exactly make sense for them to completely and totally throw the bag at him if he hasn't completely, I guess, molded into the role that they're looking for him to mold into, especially if he can't stay on the floor.
Clint Capela had, I'll call it a weird 21-22. There was injuries baked in. I thought he played a lot better from like the middle of the season on when you were looking at how he was moving defensively. But then he
Mhm.
finishes the season with a right knee issue. And then there was just something off about him on
Mhm.
offense last year. It felt like, should expectations be tempered? Is there reason for concern here with him? Or is it just if he's going to be healthy, like he'll just be fine?
I honestly think that Clint is the type of guy that if he's healthy, he'll be fine. Just looking at his numbers, I mean, he was steadily improving, up until right before Houston traded him. And then when he got to Atlanta and had, that fresh scenery, he kind of got back into things. And I think also if you think about how the Hawks kind of were at the beginning of last year, they were just kind of a little lackluster, if you will, and then things picked up when he picked up. And so I think if he can be that guy that the Hawks need him to be, I honestly think he'll be just fine. And when I say the guy that they need him to be, it's healthy, it's attacking the rim, being the lob threat that we know that he can be, especially when he's paired up with Trae. And I think the fact that they added in Murray to that adds another layer that will maybe even, make him even more of a threat.
I am curious to see how, like, if they run a ton of pick and rolls with Murray and Capella, just how that looks, because Murray's such a different player from
Hmm.
Trae Young that I could see them, him and Capella not trying to occupy the same space, but like those pick and rolls, like shrink the floor just a little bit more than they'd be used to. And so I am curious to see how that ends up working out for Atlanta.
I think that they're gonna go through that adjustment period, and I think we're gonna see a lot of, "Ooh, what was that?" At the beginning of the year. But again, I think that the Hawks are the kind of team that surprises people. I mean, we saw them make that run to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple of years ago, and so with Nate at the helm, I think, and also we're not even factoring. I just remembered they added in Kyle Korver, so the fact that we have another type of player who, or not a player anymore. I'm sorry. Um, the fact that we have another layer of a person who's helping to develop this team, I think that they'll be fine. I'm not too worried. I think if it goes past 20-25 games, that's when we should kind of start to wonder if this is really gonna fit. But I think that we do need to give them that chance to adjust, especially since you threw so many new pieces
Mhm.
at this roster. Um, but I think that if everyone is healthy, we won't have that kind of like stop and go, injecting new people into the lineup, taking new people out of the lineup. I think there will be some steady flow to them being able to adjust and get used to each other a little bit faster.
I am in love with Onyeka Okongwu.
Mhm.
He defensive mobility off the charts, but when you watch him on offense, and I think people just kind of pigeonhole him into that traditional big man role, he's like flipped up floaters. He's made these
Mhm.
decisions after making one or two dribbles. I'm fascinated by him. How do you see him being used this year? He is clearly the third big up on this team behind Capella and Collins when you look at the roster, I would think.
Mhm.
But are his minutes inherently repressed at all because we should see Collins play some backup five as well? Or is this someone that the Hawks he's dealt with injuries too through his
Mhm.
first two seasons. Is this someone they're really kind of ready to cut loose so they can see how he fits in long term with them?
I kind of disagree just a little bit with him being behind Collins. I think they're actually going to try and keep Collins a little bit more in his natural position at the four, and that will leave minutes open for Onyeka to be the backup five to Capella. Just because, I mean, I think the fact that they added in Murray again, they have more size in that starting lineup,
Mhm.
so I think it'll trickle down to the that second unit. I think that it won't you won't need Collins to be that backup five, if you will. I think in the past that they've kind of been pigeonholed into that just because they haven't had a serviceable big that they can use as a backup to Capella. I mean, not to crap on Yang from last season, but I mean, I don't think he was the type of player that they needed. But now that they have Okongwu and they've seen that he is capable of keeping pace with a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo and that he can keep pace with Joel Embiid, I think that gives them a little bit more confidence that he can be the guy who is the backup to Capela, leaving Collins to kind of stay in his natural position at the 4. So I think that's kind of how we'll see them let him loose a little bit more and how he'll earn his minutes a bit more, especially because we saw that. I'm just looking up what he shot last year. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but he shot 69% from the field last year. So, I mean, that tells me that he's a very reliable guy who can, one, go and get shots, especially as a lob threat, but two, he can go out, get offensive rebounds, and they talked a lot with him about making sure that he is being that guy on the defensive end as well. And he seems like the type of guy that he will put in the work for that. I mean, I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and he seemed like the type of person that was working really hard, making sure that he met all of the kind of thresholds that they set out for him this offseason on both the offensive as well as the defensive end.
And I guess it makes sense to play him and Collins maybe even more together than they did last season. Capela was out for a good amount of time, so they played some together, but not as much as you'd think. Is that a pairing that you think the Hawks are willing to explore more than in the front court with Collins and Okongwu?
I think they're intrigued by it, especially because Capela's contract is up at the end of this coming season, correct?
He signed an extension, so he has 2 more guaranteed years after this one left on his deal.
Gotcha. That's right. So I mean, if Capela has a season like he did last year, I think the fact that they liked what they saw from Okongwu could maybe give them the assurance that they need to move on from Capela if they don't want to keep that money on the books and maybe find some kind of deal to bring in somebody else to be the backup to Okongwu.
What's also interesting to me about this roster, if you look at it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but are they just counting on Jalen Johnson for rotation minutes this year when you're looking at sort of who would be there? You mentioned Kaminsky. If your first 3 bigs are Capela, Collins, and Okongwu, I have Johnson penciled in as like that 4th if you're floating around between the 4 or 5, but there is Kaminsky on this roster as you. So they're just counting on Jalen Johnson this year to be a rotation player.
I would think so. When they brought him in toward the end of the season, I mean, he showed that he did belong in the NBA. I mean, I think in his first game out, he got like 11 points or something like that, which is obviously a career high for him after spending much of the time in the G League. So I think maybe what might hamper him a little bit is he did have a non-surgical procedure this offseason. So maybe they'll bring him along a little bit more slowly, and Kaminsky will be that guy who might be the backup 4. But if I'm looking at the roster, I think Jalen Johnson is that guy that, they're going to see if he will have that breakout sophomore season, kind of similar to Okongwu. I mean, he missed the first 28 games last year, Okongwu did. And I mean, we saw how he rose to the occasion and did what was needed, especially in the playoffs. So maybe they're banking on Jalen Johnson being that guy who, now that he's had 1 year in the NBA under his belt and he's gotten a taste of it, he understands the speed of the game. Things are slowing down for him. He's poised to have, in my opinion, a breakout sophomore season.
He is someone that I really liked when they drafted him, and I think that if he can hit like some standstill corner threes, which he could not do last year, even just standstill threes at all, it becomes big. And like he's a pretty good finisher around the basket. And he can be moved around so much on the defensive end that I like the idea of being able to just plug him into the rotation. It was just, I guess, surprising to me that given the direction the Hawks are headed and how little he played last year. And he had this game, it was towards the end of the season against the Warriors, where it was like kind of wow, but it's how do you factor in that late season noise? I guess I was a little surprised that this is sort of where they ended up. And maybe it doesn't matter because your first 3 bigs are so good and you can cannibalize most of the front court minutes between those 3. But it's an interesting dice roll if that's the plan. I respect it. I like it. I'm just curious to see whether it'll work.
I mean, again, this team is a very young team. I mean, your leader is under the age of 25, but I think that's one of the reasons that they brought a guy like Kyle Korver aboard is that, he's going to be tasked with developing this roster, not just those rookie players, sophomore players, but also from the top down. So if you're bringing in a guy who was considered one of, an elite sharpshooter, I think that will trickle down to this group of guys who may have struggled to knock some shots down, especially if they're doing it from, as you mentioned, a standstill catch and shoot kind of position.
Something about their offseason that I don't think got enough attention was the Kevin Huerter trade. It was just looked at, oh, they got a Kings first round pick, and Justin Holiday and Mo Harkless can kind of plug
Mhm.
into the rotation if need be. I guess you could go to Harkless instead of Jalen Johnson if you're looking for that fourth big or just someone to play backup four. I'd prefer to see Jalen Johnson over Mo Harkless. I'm not going to lie. But is there like some risk caked in here, especially knowing that Bogdanovich has dealt? He's so good. And there were minutes without Trae Young where he really anchored what were actually good lineups. And I know that one of the biggest talking points has been, oh, the Hawks suck when Trae Young isn't on the floor because one,
Mhm.
it's true, but like there were lineups that worked in part because Bogdanovich is so good. But he's also like he dealt with some knee things last year, and he's always seemed like banged up since he's really been with Atlanta. So is there just a little bit of extra risk caked in here with that move, or did they view it as, oh, well, we really needed to flesh out kind of the wing rotation anyway, and that's why we went with the Justin Holiday Harkless first round pick combo?
I think so. I think yes, they realize that they might be sacrificing some shooting a little bit, but I think the fact that they were like, we were so bad defensively, like that's what got us chased off the court in the first round of the playoffs. I think there is going to be that expectation that you're going to be leaning on guys like Justin Holiday to maybe get a few more shots up. But I mean, Justin Holiday has shown that he is somewhat capable of being the guy that they can rely on to get those shots. I mean, he's a career 37% shooter. I mean, it's not necessarily on the highest of volume, but it's at least 5 attempts per game. And so, I think maybe yes, Holiday is a little bit of that like kind of locker room guy that a lot of teams flesh their rosters out with, but he adds so much, I think, in terms of being the person that can kind of again trickle down defense, rub off on the
Mhm.
rest of the guys, which is what they need. And so, I guess they're banking on Bogey's off-season surgery to help make sure that that knee holds up throughout the whole season. I guess they're also banking on maybe Murray being able to knock down, 1 or 2 shots a game, 3 shots a game from three. Um, they also have DeAndre Hunter, and I think as we talked about earlier in this podcast, they're going to probably be banking on him to knock a couple more down. Um, so I think that just kind of tells you that they have a lot more faith in Hunter, a lot more faith in Murray
Mhm.
to be able to be those guys that they need them to be, not just on the defensive end, but from a long range position.
And I guess I didn't really even think about this. I'm probably discounting like Hunter can play
Hmm.
some four and
Hmm.
Holiday played some four while he was with Indy. And so like you can do Holiday Hunter as like your 3-4 and make that work where it's not as tenable when Kevin Huerter's in that equation because he was like very much felt like a one position player to me, like that swing
Yeah.
man. He's not like a three, and you're clearly not going to play him at the one. I just
Hmm.
thought it was I guess not a curious trade. I was a little bit surprised
It
by it
is,
when they made
but
it.
I also think too, it's that I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to be relying on Harkless either, or even Kaminsky, but both of those guys can be moved down from their natural positions and play whether 3, 4 in Harkless's case, and then Kaminsky can play the 4, 5. So they added a little bit of versatility in that sense as well. And from earlier reports, it does seem like they're going to be relying a little bit on Kaminsky to kind of be that shift between the 4 and the 5, which is why I don't believe that they're going to be relying on Collins for that.
Okay.
Just because they'll have him do what he does best in that starting rotation. And then also throughout the rest of the game, whereas, again, they'll rely on some of their other depth players to be kind of those shifts up and down as they see fit. But we have media day tomorrow, so we're actually going to be able to get a little bit more clarification, hopefully, on how they see these guys shifting throughout the season based on what they need, based on the matchups that they have, based on, I mean, I guess where people are injury wise, health wise, and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, one thing that's funny is, it's not funny actually, but we still have, I'm sorry, I remembered that we're talking about, a virus that's still going around, is that there's still COVID. So even though people may not necessarily have injuries, we still have to factor in that we're still kind of dealing with COVID. I mean,
Right.
I think that because the league has kind of, taken a step back in terms of what the protocols are, that's still a factor that, teams will have to worry about. So I I think we'll see. But to go back to what we were talking about earlier, I think that the fact that they did sign those guys, as you mentioned, Harkless, Holiday, and the fact that they can shift and be versatile guys, I think that's kind of what they were banking on when they decided to move Huerter to the Kings.
When you do look at what's, now that we sort of talked about the roster in some, the two prevailing themes from the Hawks, like I mentioned before, are they suck when Trae Young's not on the floor, and their defense was really bad last year. When you look at this roster as it is constructed while we're talking, which of those weaknesses are they better built to improve upon this season?
To be honest, I do genuinely think that they went out and got that secondary ball handler that they were missing last year. I really think that Murray kind of, I mean, it's a little bit of a 1-2 punch, but I don't think the defense is going to get overnight just because you added in one guy who is a monster on the defensive end of the court. But the fact that he's a guy that can go out and get you 20.1 points a game, the fact that he can get you 9+ assists per game, I think that's one of the biggest things that they solved. So it takes a lot of the pressure off of Trae Young to be the guy who goes out and gets offense going when it starts to stagnate. And I think the fact that we talked about it again so much, the fact that Murray likes to attack the rim, he's gonna, I think, really start to pick up the pace for the Hawks. And I don't think defenses are gonna fully know how to shut that down when Young is sitting down and when Murray's on the court, especially if you're pairing him with a guy like Bogey and Bogey's healthy. Especially if you're pairing him with a guy like, we talked a little bit about him, DeAndre Hunter. I mean, I don't know. I think that was one of the, as we said, the biggest needs that they had. And I think that they totally addressed that. I think that we're going to see that like the Young minutes are going to be a lot. I don't think we're going to see, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but I don't think we're going to see as much of a drop off in terms of the offense when Trae Young sits, because Murray is a far and beyond capable primary shot maker, play caller. I think he's going to be the best quote unquote quarterback that they're going to have when Young isn't on the floor with them.
And I'm 100% with you. Last year, when DeLon Wright and Bogey were on the court, the Hawks were actually a net plus without Trae Young. And so now you're going from DeLon Wright to Dejounte Murray. I think that matters a ton. And maybe there's a drop off offensively there, just because those units were so good offensively. But as you mentioned, like Murray, especially with the way he played in San Antonio last year, brings that push the ball element, and he's a better defender than DeLon Wright. And so he elevates those units organically too. And I also just think it's tougher. While I do believe that someone like Murray was close to a necessity for their defense, it's harder for him to materially impact the overall defense, because a lot of people believe that like guard defense doesn't matter. I don't really fall into that camp, but I do think it's inherently harder to shift the tenor of an entire defense from that position. And so Hunter and Capela's health, and then even Collins, like those are guys, and how they handle the backup wing rotation. Those are aspects to me that are going to, make a larger dent on the defense. And so if you just have Murray in the non-Trae minutes with Bogey, there are some of those units that they might win you games because the way that they're able to handle or navigate the minutes without your best player on the court. And so I'm totally with you that I think they've addressed that more than even the defense.
And I actually think too, one player that we haven't talked about is their rookie, Tyrese Martin. I'm not saying that Nate McMillan is going to be throwing like 20+ minutes at Tyrese Martin, but I think that what we saw as he got more and more comfortable during summer league, to me, that shows that he could probably be a capable player in that third unit, maybe when, you have Bogey and Murray off the court, and you need a guy who's going to be a dog on defense to kind of continue pushing that side of the ball forward. I don't think, as we said, I don't think they've totally addressed everything. I'm not sure how much of an impact, Harkless and Holiday's leadership will have on trickling down. I want to see it trickle down a lot. But I think it's kind of an uphill battle to kind of change a team's defense like 100% overnight. I think one thing that kind of concerned me a tiny bit is when I did get a chance to talk to Coach McMillan after they hired Mike Longobardi this past offseason, is that he said that, Longobardi didn't necessarily believe in zone. He believed in man-to-man. And I'm kind of wondering, are they going to be doing a little bit more versatility throughout the season? Because you can't rely solely on man-to-man, because I feel like if you have a defender who's not up to snuff, that guy's going to get burned and it's going to crumble the rest of the unit. So we'll see, what changes they made, especially because Longobardi was with the Kings and I believe they were 29 or 30 last year. So, I mean, I don't know. We'll see is all I can kind of, I guess, conclude from that. Wait and see.
I mean, that sort of leads into an interesting question of what do you think a 10-man rotation looks like for this team, since we've talked about everyone. I think there are the givens. Like we have Trae, Dejounte, Collins, Capela, Hunter, Bogey, and Okongwu. And so that's 7. How do you see those final 3 spots shaking out? I know we've mentioned Justin Holiday, Jalen Johnson. You mentioned Tyrese Martin. Do you think even AJ Griffin is someone who gets a crack if he's healthy? I didn't mention this before, but I was wondering if he was part of the theory of moving Kevin Huerter, is that you think you have this other knockdown shooter in AJ Griffin.
Yeah, I mean, he shot 40% or 44% from 3 at Duke. Let me double check that. But if you have a guy that's shooting over 40% from 3, I feel like that will add a little bit of confidence to move the guy who's shooting close to 40% in the NBA. I think where the Hawks were a little bit hesitant with him is that they wanted to see him kind of unpack a few other skill sets in his game. Like, can he be the guy that attacks the rim a little bit? Can he be the guy that knocks shots down from mid-range? I mean, we didn't get a chance to see him at Summer League because he was dealing with some foot soreness. Yeah. So if health is going to be something that's going to be a consistent worry for this team, I mean, I don't know how much you're going to be able to rely on him to be that knockdown shooter if he can't even go on the court. But I do think that played a role in their decision to move on from her, because they were like, hey, at least we know if he gets a catch and shoot shot, he can knock it down. So I think also Tyrese Martin played a little bit of that. I mean, he knocked down, I believe, 36% of his shots from 3. So, I mean, I guess if you're adding a couple of rookies who can be those knockdown shooters, I think that adds a little bit of confidence to this front office. And again, I don't want to put too much on Kyle Korver, but I think the fact that he's going to be in charge of player development will play a role in seeing how fast these guys come along and if they are going to be NBA ready when the season tips off in a few weeks.
So if you were sort of fleshing out let's say the final 3 of their rotation, and you're dealing with AJ Griffin's healthy, you have Tyrese Martin, there's Mo Harkless, Holiday, Jalen Johnson, and Frank Kaminsky. Who are the 3 players from that group that you see this team needing to rely on most?
So I'll probably actually say Aaron Holiday, just for his ball handling.
Forgot about him too, yeah. They have 2 of the Holiday brothers. Forgot about that.
Exactly. So I'll probably say him just because they're going to need that third ball handler when Murray and Trae Young are off the floor. But I think I'm gonna so that puts us at 8. So I think the final 2 spots, I think will probably go to Kaminsky, especially if he's healthy. And then one more spot.
I think probably Justin Holiday would make the most sense, right? That seems like a guy who
I think he would be that backup. I think he would be that backup 3 to Hunter.
The the bottom of their rotation is going to be something that I just monitor all season because when I was trying to come up with 10, it was just confusing the hell out
Yeah.
of me.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that maybe is something that they considered rotating from, quarter to quarter. And when I say quarter to quarter, I mean like within the season, not within each individual game.
What's one thing about this team that's not being talked enough about on a national level, whether it's an element, a player, the way that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
play anything along those lines?
I think all of the concerns, questions, and worries that people might have about this team are actually being talked about pretty plenty. I think the biggest question that people have is how Murray and Trae Young are going to coexist, and I think that's appropriate if I'm being honest, just because they're both such different players. They're both used to being the guy on their teams, and so especially with how this Eastern Conference is set up now, being so competitive, you've got Mitchell in there, you've got the Nets kind of having their core pretty much set between KD and Kyrie and Ben Simmons. Boston, despite them losing their head coach for the season, will still be, a threat. You've got Milwaukee, who pretty much stayed the same and added a few things. I think the everything that we need to talk about this team is on the table, and appropriately so. So if I were going to add a storyline that people should maybe keep an eye on, is maybe how will this team kind of start the season off, especially because of how lackluster they were last year. Will the defense click? Will they overperform? Will they perform as we should expect them to? I think that's what we need to talk about a little bit more, is the start of this Hawks season, and not just, the addition of Murray to the roster. I think whether they meet expectations is what's going to kind of set them up for being a team that's in the playoff conversation, as opposed to being a play-in team or out of the postseason conversation altogether.
I think the assumption is that their starting five is going to be Murray, Young, Hunter, Collins, and Capela. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
that ends up being their go-to crunch time unit, or could you see some futzing and fiddling towards the end of close games? And obviously, some of that could be matchup dependent, but just sort of in
Yeah,
general.
I could see Bogey being somebody that they throw in crunch time, just because of his ability to knock down shots as consistently as they need the team to do in those situations. Trae and Dejounte are both players who perform amazingly in clutch time, and Bogey's in that group as well. He was somebody that averaged, I believe, like 2.6 points per game in clutch situations. So that's somebody that they're going to want to turn to. Hunter wasn't even on the list, if I'm being honest, when I looked yesterday. So I'll double check that, but I don't think he was on there at all. So I think that it looks like the Hawks I got some breaking news. The Hawks are adding their last training camp spot, Armani Brooks, just in case you wanted to know that.
Exhibit Ooh, Armani 10. Brooks.
Yeah, Exhibit 10. So, yeah, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if Hunter and Bogey are players that they kind of punch in, trade out, depending on what they need. If they need, DeAndre's length a little bit more on the defensive end, that's somebody that they can rely on. And if they need a bit of a more consistent shooter, then Bogey is something that they can absolutely rely on. But I definitely agree on kind of like both other ends of the lineup, with Collins and Capela being kind of like the two go-to front court guys, and obviously Murray and Trae being the backcourt guys. That 3 spot, I think, will be a little bit more interchangeable.
I'd be with you. And like the 3 and the 4, if they really wanted to, if they want to go with Hunter and Bogey and Downs.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a weird lineup that you would like to see from this team, just looking at the personnel that they have?
I think a weird lineup that I would want to see, and this is really, really, I don't think it's actually that weird, but I kind of would want to see, obviously Trae, obviously Dejounte, Bogey, I kind of want to see what Okongwu would be like at the 4.
Okay.
And then maybe either Collins or Capela.
That would be
So that,
fun.
yeah. So you kind of have Capela and Okongwu kind of shifting between the 4 and the 5 a little bit, or same with if you're using Collins, then definitely you have Okongwu and Collins kind of sharing 4 and 5 duties, and how that would kind of work.
The one I want to see, I'm pretty sure might be terrible on offense or be iffy, but like I would love to see Trae, Murray, with Hunter, Jalen Johnson, and Okongwu to see like, oh, could we actually try and switch as much as possible in a lineup that has Trae Young defensively? I would have questions about the offense in that one, but when I think like just weirdo lineups, I would love to see Nate McMillan just to try that, throw it out, see if it sticks. I don't know why you would ever want to have Capela and Collins on the bench at the
Right.
same time. But if one of them is injured or just
Mm-hmm.
out for a game, I'd love to see that lineup. I'm just
I
morbidly
think that would
curious.
be I think that would be fun. What if we went with like an all just like young players lineup where it's I mean, I guess Trae, because you definitely need a guard, like a point guard. Martin, just because again, he has the potential to be a great player on both sides of
I'm going to
the ball.
aggregate this segment of how high you are on Tyrese Martin. Future superstar Tyrese Martin.
No, don't do that. You'll see me on freezing cold takes in like 5 years or something like that. No, but I am pretty high on him just because I was pretty impressed. He had a really crappy game in that first summer league matchup that they had with the Jazz. And obviously you don't want to take too much away from summer league, but he just got better and better and better in each of the games that they played. And it's just hard for me not to be high on a guy and root for him, especially because when you learn of his story, he was a guy that worked for FedEx as a driver and a warehouse guy during the pandemic because his mom lost her job. And so it's hard not to root for a guy that works that hard, you know?
Right, for sure.
So yeah. So then Griffin, Jalen Johnson, and Okongwu. Just throw all the young guys in there. Trae's the only veteran that has more than 3 years of experience in the league, and see how that goes.
We've come a long way from the original all youth lineup where it was Trae and Collins and Reddish and Huerter and Hunter. So how much this team has changed. So as we record this, though, their over under is set at 45.5 wins. Would you take the over or the under on that right now?
I don't know. I just feel like the Hawks are a team that always surprises you just because of how young and hungry they are. And so I'm going to go ahead and take the over on 45.5. I just think that obviously they didn't fix all of their defensive issues, but I think that the fact that they're still going to be a top offense in this league is going to be something that kind of bails them out of situations where obviously you'd want them to be better defensively, but they're scoring so many points that it kind of offsets any of the other issues that they might have on the other end of the ball or the other side of the ball.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you. I'll have to go back like closer to the start of the regular season and see if I would still have them as the over, because the East is just so deep at the top
Oh my gosh.
now. But when you look at their top, let's say top 7 guys on this team, if they're not on pace for 46 wins at like 20 games into the season, like I could see there being some upheaval with the roster at that point.
Not even just upheaval with the roster, but maybe even just like
Nate
coaching
McMillan
staff. Like there's another issue that's going on that needs to be addressed that I don't think has to do with anything that's going on the court.
Yeah, if they get off to like a 4-7 start or something, like there's gonna be so much noise emanating out of there.
Oh my goodness!
I honestly don't think it's going to happen this year. Last year was a demonstrative letdown. I think expectations were set too high based off that conference finals appearance. But looking at the makeup of their roster right now, I do think that they're probably one of the top 6 teams in the East to get that surefire playoff spot. So I would go with the over as well, but I'm wildly uncomfortable saying that just because of how many
too.
the top 8 teams in the East could all be really good. I don't trust Brooklyn, but like you look at Brooklyn and it's like, oh, like they could just be this title contender that's just there.
It's exactly. I'm with you on that too. It's like logically, I shouldn't say that they're going to get more than 46 wins in the upcoming season. But I don't know. It's just, I guess
They got
maybe,
43 when they were like pretty depressing for a lot of
yeah.
last season. And so like the Murray trade and like if Okongwu is healthy and Capela is
Yeah.
healthy, like that should be worth an extra 4 wins, I think.
Oh, I agree. And I think too, if Capella is healthy and playing at the level that we've know that he should be playing at, I think that gives you a little bit of comfort that they should get at least 46, 47 wins.
Is there anything about this team or anyone on this team I haven't asked you about that you think we need to touch upon before I let you go?
I don't, you know, not really, just because I feel like we've touched on the people who are going to be the major players next season, and barring any like injuries or anything, like I just knocked on my table by the way. Barring any injuries or anything like that, I really think that this team can be one that surprises people, especially if we continue to see any other upheaval in the Eastern Conference based on what happened today. So yeah, I think this is going to be a fun season, maybe frustrating season at times, but it certainly will be an exciting one.
Lauren, this was great. Are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you guys can find me at ajc.com/hawks or slash Lauren-Williams, but also obviously my Twitter handle is at Williams Lauren L.
Spelled exactly as it sounds. And if you're watching, you see it on the screen. So hit that follow button. She's a fantastic follow. She's already killing the Hawks beat. I'm excited
Thank
to
you.
see all the stuff you write about this season. Thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah.
podcast. I hope you allow me to pester you again in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you put up with all of my rambling for the last like 45 minutes shows that, I feel like we'll continue to have some good conversations as the
Yes, it was
season
way more.
unfolds.
It was coherent, way more coherent than you think. And as a fellow rambler, I can appreciate it. So thank you once again so much for coming on, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.